All right, everybody, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. And thank you so much for joining us today. That was a little bit of Bob Marley to get us started. But not only are we jamming here, we have a great lady who is our producer. She's going to jump in and introduce herself and tell us all about the show we have planned today. None other than our producer, Elizabeth Siri from Foundations Inc. Hey, Elizabeth, how you doing?
Hey, Shawn. Hey, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Siri. I'm the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning at Foundations, Inc. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm really excited. Today, we're bringing you just a little piece of the Beyond School Hours National Education Conference with our virtual edition of Perspectives from the Field. This year's series is focused on resilience, and we've been tackling some of the biggest issues facing children today. And we have another great conversation planned for you. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome our host, White-Riley-Peterson Fellow, Shawn Petty, and our amazing special guest, Julie Wild-Curry. Julie is the Director of 21st Century Community Learning Center programs in Fairbanks, Alaska. But before I toss it over to Shawn, I really need to say a special thank you to the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. Without their support, this virtual talk show just wouldn't be possible. So we would really want to say a special thank you to them. All right, Shawn, I'm going to pass it back to you. Thank you both, Julie and Shawn, for joining us. We're really excited to have you today.
All right, well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. As many people know, I call Elizabeth kind of my our producer, because that's exactly what she is. She's been with us for 5 years, producing the show and making sure the show is the best possible show it can be. So very excited. Now, this is the virtual edition of the show, and this is where we interview each of our panelists. And then we also have a live version of the show that's going to happen at the Beyond School Hours National Conference, February 17th through 20th in 2021. So be on the lookout for that. Look for material about that. And also, as you are interacting with us today, don't forget to use the hashtag #EveryChildEveryday so that we can hashtag out kind of our great discussion. Now, we have a very special guest joining us. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen and show video here. He's going to be with us for the very beginning, but he's going to jump in and give I asked Julie if it was okay if we had Terry Peterson say a few words, and she said, I've known Terry all my life. Yeah, he can talk. So, hey, Mr. Peterson, how you doing today?
Hey, how are you? I hadn't planned to say a thing. I was trying to sneak in, and I just want to hear you and Julie talk. She has so much great experience, and so do you. And I really am just listening in to try to learn something. And even though I've known Julie forever, I don't probably know all the things she's going to talk about at all. And so that's why I wanted to sneak in, and I hope everybody else also appreciates this conversation with you.
Well, thank you so much. We just wanted to recognize that you were here. I mean, both Julie and I are White-Riley-Peterson Fellows, and as people know, that fellowship, you're one of 3 that fellowship is named after. So we wanted to recognize that you were here. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good luck. And I hope this is such an important topic. I mean, every day and every week goes by, I don't think it can get more complicated, more things going more off the rail, and it can't last longer, but I'm afraid it's all going to persist for a while. So anything we can learn from Julie about all this, and you and your other group, folks listening in, is so important right now. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Well, just before we get started, I am going to go through a little bit of the technology just for everybody. So our technology today, this is the webinar version of Zoom. And so we do have videos turned off just to save on bandwidth so that you can, see our smiling faces, so to speak, I guess. Also, we have everybody muted. But if you have a question, because it's very engaging, we want to have an engaging conversation. Please throw your questions or anything that you want to bring up in the chat room. Like Blair's letting us know she's also a White-Riley-Peterson fellow. We know Blair. And Blair's here, so she's saying hello. We have some other folks in, so it's so nice to see everybody. But today, Julie and I are going to talk about resilience and hope. And, I have to say, first of all, Julie, how are you doing this morning?
I am doing very well, actually. It's a beautiful day in Alaska. It is fall here. It's a little crisp in the morning, but I always feel fortunate to wake up and come to a job that I love. And also living in Alaska, I appreciate that too.
Now, I'm just curious, when you say it's brisk, because I'm from San Antonio, so for brisk for me is like 75 degrees. What is brisk for you?
Well, this morning it was pretty good. I think it was 41. The other morning it was 36.
Whew, that's like freezing.
Don't
Now,
come here in January then, Shawn.
well, I have only been fortunate to go to Alaska just once in my life, but it was absolutely beautiful. And so, what is the time difference there? We're looking at 12 o'clock in Texas right now, noon.
Right. And
So,
it is 9 a.m. here, or a little after 9.
9 a.m. Oh my goodness. Now, I have a question about Alaska, and that is, so when we see Alaska on the map, it kind of looks like the size of Texas. But I understand that like 5 Texas could fit in Alaska or something like that. Like it's really a huge landmass. Is that true?
It is. And in fact, one year for the Foundations Conference, our staff almost made up a t-shirt that had Texas inside of Alaska, just to show, because that year the conference was in Texas, but we decided that would not be a really nice thing to do to our hosts.
I was about to say, we have some of my colleagues from Texas on the line right now. They're probably going to jive me about bringing it up, but I just had to point out, because you work with, or you've worked with after-school programs all across Alaska, and I understand sometimes getting to those programs can be a little difficult traveling.
Yes. So the other thing, when we talk about rural across the nation, pretty much people can get to rural by road. And we can get to some of our rural sites by road, but there are others that you have to fly in. And that can be difficult depending on the time of year. So if you're in a smaller plane, there are certain times that it's okay to fly and certain times that you're weathered in for a while. So you have to really plan for both scenarios and kind of take a look at the weather before you go and prepare for that.
Oh my goodness. So literally you have to fly into these areas, like what, in like a little Cessna or
It
or
could
a,
be, for Southeast Alaska, it would be sometimes float planes, depending on where you are going, and can be the same for the rest of Alaska, float, or we call them ski planes in the wintertime as well. So quite a few people in Alaska have their pilot license or even go through ground school to be able to take over if necessary, just to have that in your back pocket.
wow, I can't imagine. So I grew up in Hawaii. I mean, I don't look like an island boy, but I grew up as a not a native Hawaiian, but I grew up in Hawaii, and we had trouble sometimes with certain resources because resources had to be flown into us because Hawaii is rich in resources, but not things like milk, for example, was difficult for us to get.
Yeah.
Is Alaska? Do you have those challenges, or is everything just readily available and you just fly stuff in, or what happens there?
There are a combination of things. So you have probably experienced shelf-stable milk.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot more of that, especially out in rural areas as backup. They quite often will get fresh, but you also have to plan to have backup dry goods all the time. Again, depending on the weather, barges sometimes lose part of what they're carrying. I mean, there's a variety of situations that happen, and you're always prepared. We always have extra clothes and blankets in our cars, especially in the wintertime. It's a wonderful environment, but it can be harsh and dangerous. And I know that also happens elsewhere in the United States, especially when you talk about different types of environmental factors that are happening right now.
I appreciate you making that connection. Folks on the line are probably wondering why I'm asking you about this, and I'm just trying to give everybody a perspective before we dig into some of the topics today of what your situation is up in Alaska and what you might face. But to give further perspective, we have to talk a little bit about you because you have an amazing story. So I understand you are not necessarily, you weren't born in America. You were born somewhere else and you came here. Is that correct?
Yes, I was born in a little town called Outbridge, which is right outside of Sheffield, Yorkshire, England. And my family immigrated to Canada when I was, about 6, a little over 6. And we actually took a boat to Canada. So that's how old I am. I used to talk about it like it was the Queen Mary, I think, that we came across on. It was not. My sister and brother, who still live in Canada, actually informed me they found the paperwork in some of my mom's things, and it was the Empress of Canada. And while I thought it was this huge cruise ship through my eyes, it was more of a transport and barge type of boat that people were traveling to immigrate to Canada on.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's like a Titanic story, so to speak. Right?
Thank goodness it wasn't the Titanic story.
Yeah, without the sinking, like you made it.
Right.
But how long did it take?
Well, it was originally supposed to take 10 days, and apparently we had the highest seas they had ever seen during that time period. I'm not sure if that has changed, but 60 to 80 foot swells. And so it ended up taking us a full 2 weeks. I remember.
Wow, you said 60 to 80 feet swells?
Yeah.
I mean, like, just to give everybody perspective, if you're in California, the waves there are like 4 feet, to 6 feet. And in Hawaii, we get like 15-foot waves. But I can't even imagine a 60-foot swell. I mean, that's huge.
Yes.
Were you sick?
Yes. So was everybody else on the boat, except for maybe the younger children, who are still crawling around. It wasn't much different for them, I think.
So people were immigrating on this boat when you were little and coming to Canada. What was that like? Were they immigrating mainly for better opportunities, for just to seek a new area? Or what do you, I know you were young, but do you remember anything about that time?
I do. We had a variety of different families when we ended up taking the train to our first destination, which was Edmonton, Alberta. And we lived in what would be considered a condo community right now. But there were families from all sorts of places, which I really loved. We had friends from the West Indies, from the East Indies, from Germany, from France, and just being able to experience that for a little bit growing up, our family really appreciated that diversity. And I certainly appreciated the food that everybody else cooked. Being from Britain, we're not known for our flavorful foods, but there were just so many opportunities to learn different things from different cultures. And so, yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. There was a courtyard area where all the kids would gather in the evening to play all sorts of different games. that people brought from different places. And I can't remember what they were. I just remember they were different, and it was fun learning all of that.
Do you think so? So you grew up, or at least in this experience here, in that multicultural type of framework where there was was there still a majority, I guess you could say, or was everybody pretty much like just blended together?
I would say that there was still, other than our neighborhood, when we all went to school, I would say it was probably half immigrant and half people who had been there for a while. But it just seemed always very welcoming. And most of the people had come for other opportunities. Canada was encouraging people to come with a variety of different skill sets, or the adults having a variety of different skill sets, as it was a young country building up.
So they were encouraging immigration.
Yes.
Look, boy, how times have changed over the years, right? But interesting. So do you think that kind of gave you a basis for the work you eventually went into?
I absolutely think this had an impact. I remember a couple of things coming over on the boat. We had, I guess it was an activities director for children. Mm-hmm. And so there were a variety of different activities organized. And I remember at one point being this person's helper and organizer, and really enjoying that. And then if I think about early years, we had after school programs, and there were a variety of things offered. So language classes for those who needed to learn English, as well as share a variety of other different languages we could take. And also another one that sticks in my mind, because while I am English speaking, I had a very strong Yorkshire accent at the time. And so elocution was another after school program that we were, I want to say, able to go to, and not voluntold to go to,
okay.
But to help us. And I think drama was another one that really helped people connect. And again, this was elementary school. So after school was a big part of, has been a big part of my life, all my life.
Interesting. Well, so now I know your background a little bit more because we've talked and known each other for a little while, but you ended up somehow over in Vancouver.
Yes.
And you went to school there, is that correct?
Did. So from Edmonton, my father was an architect, and so there were times where certain areas were building and other times where they weren't. And so we moved to Toronto for a while, and then in early high school, we ended up in Vancouver, Canada.
Now in Vancouver, you worked at a community school, or you went to. Did you work at the community school, or you did both? You went to the community school and worked there, is that correct?
Well, it's more like volunteer work. So yes, this was a community school that had after school adult education. There were opportunities that we were expected to take part in as upperclassmen in terms of working with younger students, tutoring. And so we were provided a variety of different classes on how to best work with youth and how to encourage literacy and love of reading. And then we also, as seniors, you call it seniors, we called it grade 12.
Okay.
We had projects that we were required to do for graduation, that we had many community members come in and mentor us, so adult community mentors, and give us opportunities to learn about the many different careers, and also how to be a part of your community, how to impact change in your community, how how to organize activities that benefit your community, a variety of different things like that.
So you were already starting, so now, you're in that college age or getting into the college age, and you're already starting to focus on that community, that mentorship, that build the wraparound services for a child.
Yes,
Did you have any special projects that you worked on?
I did. So one of our favorite activities growing up in our family was to go on huge wilderness escapades. It was my father who always dreamed these things up. And living in Vancouver, there are many opportunities not far from there, many mountains, many areas to explore. So what I realized is that there were not as many of my classmates that had that experience growing up. And I thought this would be a great idea for them to experience, hiking up Blackcomb Whistler area mountains and taking a long weekend to be able to do that. And just remember, this was back 44 years ago. And so Whistler was not developed like it is today. For those of us who, or for those people on the webinar today, it was, a few cabins and ski runs and things like that. And a lot more people hiked. And so that's what a friend of mine, a very good friend, Kevin, and I organized. We worked together and we worked with some wilderness mentors who helped us put this activity together for a long weekend and also prep all the students that were going with us, how to monitor whether people were struggling, what to do about that. And so as with any activity, about half of the people loved it and half of the people did not. They thought we had just exposed them to things that they didn't need to be exposed to. But we had a lot of fun activities planned while we were up on the mountain as well and things to explore. So yeah, that's one of my fondest memories actually from high school.
That's awesome. So it sounds like leading activities, guiding, community outreach is in your blood. Like all the time from when you were that 6-year-old girl helping that activities director on the Empress to, organizing this event at Whistler. Where did it go from there?
Well, part of what I think every senior does is they have different options to explore where you're going to go to college or what you're going to have to do after high school. And it was different for different people back then. There were everything from obviously trades to taking a year off, and traveling was big for many people. And also having people come into the school to talk about different opportunities. And so we had a representative from a college in Calgary, Alberta, come and talk about community schools. Mm-hmm. And also back then, recreation administration, which was called leisure education, and a variety of different ways that you could focus. And one of those was actually cruise ship, being an activities director on a cruise ship. I do remember that, and that kind of sparked my interest. But I had already planned to go to UBC at the time, mm-hmm. and was looking at kinesiology and thought, that sounds interesting, but I don't think I'm really there yet. I changed my mind and I ended up going to college in the School of Leisure Education, which really, really, my parents were very proud of. Like, what is leisure education? What will you end up doing? So that's where that started.
It's so funny for everybody on the line. This is actually what Julie's sharing is actually the birthplace of the after school movement. After school started in kind of that leisure and recreational division, so to speak, and then it gradually became more and more into a little bit more of a niche that it is today. So it's fascinating that you were there as all this is happening and guiding it. So how did you end up in Fairbanks?
Well, I had a summer job. That summer job was working at Lake Bennett, which is the halfway point on the White-Riley-Peterson Railroad.
Okay.
So that goes from Skagway to Whitehorse. So it goes from an American side to the Canadian side. And Lake Bennett is also where people who are hiking the Chilkoot Trail, you've probably heard of that, end up as well. So it was a big, or still is, a big eating house where we would feed the tourists that came on the train. We would feed the crews as well, because the crews had to switch there and go back to their respective countries. And then we would feed all the hikers that came up, and they would get on the trains back to either Skagway or Whitehorse. And so it was during my last summer that I decided, wow, I want to see what this is like in the wintertime up here. And I had a little college debt that I thought if I stayed up here, just paid that off, I'd be free and clear. And I met my husband, who worked as a conductor on the White-Riley-Peterson Railroad. And we ended up getting married that following summer. And so I immigrated to Skagway. And this is why I just feel like every step of the way I have been given opportunities to continue this journey with after school. That, I mean, it's just mind-boggling sometimes when I think about it, but I've never told the whole story. I tell pieces and parts. I don't like talking about myself. It's not part of our culture. It's uncomfortable for me to just go on and on about myself.
Sure.
But the position, so Skagway has one school. It's a K through 12 school. And that summer, as we were preparing to get married and I'm getting all my paperwork in order so that I could immigrate, the community school director position opened up.
Wow. And it's for this whole, it's for this one school that serves all these grades and the community too.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that was my first job out of college in my profession, and also in the United States.
That's cool. So a couple of questions off of that, but we do have a question from Blair in the chat room, and she says, and it's a curiosity question, it's, where does the term eating house come from? Because apparently at Davidson College near her, they don't have sororities, they have like eating houses, and they're essentially the same. So they're wondering, she's wondering where it came from, if you know.
I do not remember. But that's a good one, Blair. And now you've sparked my curiosity too. So
we will have to find out. And by the time the live show, maybe we'll have an answer.
Yeah.
So, but good question. Well, so okay, so you got this job, and you met. I find it just amazing that your husband was an actual conductor. I'm like, you know, I think a conductor, and I'm like, oh, Polar Express, or you know, that type of thing. But wow. And so, and then, did you, at the time, did you become then an American citizen, or what happened there?
So initially it was called resident alien, which I found very interesting, because in Canada are what's called green card, or what most people know as green card, is landed immigrant. So you are an immigrant that landed. And I don't know whether that was because a lot of people came on a boat or had to fly there. I'm not sure. But resident alien was just like, woo, nanu, nanu, you know. So that allows you to work. It's your green card, basically. And at this time, I'm still a British citizen, but the name on the card is permanent resident. And so, so I my children are Americans, my grandchildren are Americans. Obviously, my husband is. I have been studying for a few years for the civics part of the test, which I'm happy to say I'm pretty good at it. It's just the time. We have limited times where we can go and do this. And so maybe this will be the year.
How interesting, how fascinating. Well, with that being said, I'm curious, how did you get started in 21st century? And not only that, I'm going to take that from how you also went from, you helped found the after school network up in Alaska.
Yeah.
So tell us that story. How did that happen?
So 21st century programs, our school district actually received the first federal grant, which was specifically for middle schools. And this was in 1998, 99, I think. And at the time, I was volunteering for the PTA at our youngest son's middle school, and learned, a lot about this new grant and was very excited about it because, of course, after school. I was also at that time on the community school advisory board because we did have a community school up here. But I was working at a place called the Resource Center for Parents and Children, which is a nonprofit organization in town that really supports families, reunification of families, working with families who have had trouble learning parenting,
Mm-hmm.
doing home visits, a variety of things like that. So I wasn't looking for a job. I absolutely loved what I was doing at the time, but a good friend of mine knew that I had experience with community schools and after schools, and she said, look, just go for the interview. You can learn more about the program and go from there. You need practice. You can't just settle into a place and stay there.
Right.
And so I chose to do that interview, and I will tell you that that was the most intimidating interview I have ever done. There were 36 people at the table. And the reason 36? I share this is because they really involved the community in the process. So there was the superintendent, the assistant superintendents, a few principals, community partners like Boys and Girls Club, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, a variety of different people at the table. And when I got done with that interview, first of all, it was like this. It was more of a conversation about experience and philosophy and skill set and what would I do if. I really felt like this was something big to have that many people, for one. And then also the job itself involved at the time, 21st Century Grant. The district was in the process of writing or had just received a second grant, actually, one of the biggest in the nation, to implement 21st century programming at every school site. And again, this was 21 years ago, 22 years ago. And so it was under a different education authorization, and it was more about providing safe places for kids to be after school, where mentoring with people and getting extra assistance with homework happened. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I got here. And that first 3 months, I wondered what I had actually gotten myself into. It was a huge job, especially with the community schools part of it, and driver's education was another piece that we did as well for our high schoolers. So I'm still here. I think I asked for what was needed to really do the job and do the job well for our community. And so I feel to this day very blessed to work with the people I do, including our staff who are amazing. And there is not one day that I am not learning something. And the only thing that I'm sad about right now is that we are not currently live with our students, because that's where all the joy comes from as well.
It does. It does. I can empathize. I work in training, so I work with a lot of after school providers instead of the actual kids, but I do site visits throughout the year, and it's sad that I can't go out, and it's always like a recharge for me.
Yeah.
So we have a question in the chat room, and I feel it's a good time to kind of ask this, because I'm going to take the conversation now into some of those topics that people sometimes are like, ouch. But they're topics that need to be discussed, particularly, as Terry said in the beginning, during this time when there's a lot of unrest and a lot of various feelings going back and forth. But yet, and I know you shared this with me, and I honestly believe this, there's a strong ray of hope there too. So let me ask this question. I'm going to do it verbatim so that I get the context of the question.
Yeah.
It's from Susie, and she says, hello, you may have already touched on this, but I'm really interested in how you believe that your experience may differ from immigrants who look different than you and who might have had like a different experience, particularly with like a language ability.
Yes.
And how you feel that may impact the work you do, and what type of resources you were able to access or not access, and just further expand that. And I know this is right up your alley because we talked about this. So can you tackle that one?
Sure. So yes, I am white. I speak English very clearly due to my elocution lessons and after school. And I absolutely know that my experience is different than immigrants of color, because several of them were my friends, and several of them are my friends currently. The language barriers and what I know in my heart and what I practice is being able to listen and be with them and learn from their experience, to validate those struggles, but to also talk about the resiliency that they bring. When my daughter-in-law is from Indonesia, so English is her second language.
Oh, wow.
And I watched her go through learning a language and also completing her business degree in a time where not only her color, but her religion could have been looked at as a deficit. I say that because I feel very fortunate that I grew up in a strength-based family for the most part. And also that my time at the Resource Center for Parents and Children working with families, there was a strong influence of the strength-based approach as well as the resiliency framework. And what I see in people who have to struggle is a stronger, deeper connection to resiliency and what that takes when they are supported with people who care, who value, who appreciate what they bring to the table. And that is something that I, one, don't take for granted from anyone, but I want to talk about how important that is as we move forward as human beings in our community with our students and the families, to be able to take them where they are at right now and provide that framework for them to do what it is they want to do, not for us to force what our ideals are, but to listen, to be with them, to connect them to resources that we perhaps know about in the community, to celebrate what they're doing, to validate how difficult these things are that they're going through, but to also provide that optimism and that approach to, this is a great future. This is a great place to be. I feel blessed to be in Alaska. I love Alaska. And I'm glad you're here too, you know? And so what can we do together that you're interested in exploring? And I think a big thing too, in many cultures that I have connected with over the years, it's a big one with our Alaska Native culture, is humor. We cannot forget our sense of humor. And many cultures appreciate a good sense of humor. And so when a message that I got growing up was always, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And that sits on my shoulder all the time. I will not give up. I will be persistent. I will try different avenues. And I have seen many families who have gone through so much continue to get up, to continue to reach out for help, to look for things to improve their family situation or what they would like to do in this country as immigrants, or even our indigenous people who were in this country before we were, having to fight for what's right for them.
I'm glad you bring that up. I'm going to ask you a question about the indigenous people of your area, because growing up in Hawaii, there was a strong movement to bring back the Hawaiian language. And as a youth, I had to go to school. It was required for us to learn the Hawaiian language because we were in Hawaii, you know, we were in the island that the language actually started. And so I know as I learned more, I discovered that many indigenous tribes or indigenous people tell stories and live through that language, but yet there was a movement at one time to eliminate language and standardize language, to make it all one, whether that be English. Most of the time it was English. I know you've seen that happen, and how has it affected some of the tribes and some of the indigenous people that you work with, and how have you been able to, I know you've tapped back into it and you've allowed that language to grow and grow multiculturalism, grow storytelling. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, so
It's a lot to unpack, I'm sorry.
yeah, there have been many Alaska Native languages lost just because of the smaller communities. But there is a huge movement now to introduce different Alaska Native languages at the preschool level and projects that support that, as well as at our university. There is a lot of work around sharing and practicing the language, because for those of you who have had the opportunity to learn a second language, depending on whether you learned it as a very young child or you learn it as an adult, it's learned in a different place in your brain as an adult and doesn't stick if you're not practicing it, if you're not speaking it. And I can attest to that, having 12 years of French and 6 years of German. I haven't been practicing it, and it is not there. I'm sure it might pick up if I went there. But for our Alaska Native languages, there are so many sounds that go along with the language, and the written language versus the spoken language. And so to be able to support that within our schools, to continue to reach out to our Native organizations and talk about how we can incorporate more of that within our after-school program. The culture around storytelling, the respect around elders sharing their stories. The one thing that we have been able to do is really have our Alaska Native Olympics come into the elementary school,
Oh, wow.
but not at every school. We don't have enough people right now to share all those things, but the main tenets of the sports are really about how you survive, the strength you need to bring in your food for the winter, and games that promote that muscle growth, as well as a huge emphasis on what we call sportsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
But that the main part of what they do is really sharing how to greet each other, how to support each other, how to really look at the ways that we are community. If you go into, I have been fortunate in my other job to go into many other Alaska Native communities that are off the road system. And as soon as you enter those communities, you become family. And just the way of storytelling and listening to everything that they have gone through at times. We have had boarding schools in Alaska. We have had well-intentioned, I would say, missionaries try to wipe out the languages, a variety of different things of that nature. And to me, it's very important that we listen, that we support, that we do what we need to do to help restore some of the things that have been taken away. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. You're absolutely right. And it's okay to, for everybody, it's okay to get, have emotion around that, because it's very powerful. The, first of all, language is amazing. I speak multiple languages, and when I speak, so I speak Japanese, and when I, people don't realize, but when you speak a different language, you actually start to think in that language, and it's hard for people to understand that, because a lot of times when you're learning a language in school, it's the translation thing.
Yeah.
But when you speak it fluently, you think in that language, and there are words in various languages that aren't words in English. And one of the tactics that has been used, and I'm not making a judgment, I'm just saying right or wrong, has been used by colonialism and other aspects, is one of the first steps is to normalize the language, because then that's a way of, unfortunately, in the past, that was a way of conquering people. Yeah. And you work with a lot of tribes up in Alaska who have, and we work in our after school programs here in we call it the mainland. I don't know what Alaskans call it, but
the lower 48 is what we call it.
Okay, that's good. Okay, in the lower 48, we have a lot of Native tribes, Native American tribes, and also a lot of immigration coming from areas that are still tribal, that have that language. Yeah. So, lots of stuff. We have another follow-up question from Susie that I thought I'd bring. And then we have a lot of discussion happening in the chat room around, why don't we teach multi-language, being bilingual, multilingual, and so a good discussion there. But Susie says, first of all, she thanks you for your story. Your story is amazing. And she shares a little bit about herself. She's a 29-year-old woman of color, a daughter of immigrants with 2 masters, and has been lucky to find herself in an establishment that supports, validates, and recognizes her.
Yeah.
However, she's in Utah, and she's not sure how it is in other states, but looking at how we as professionals can really build those bridges to reach back and grab people and raise them up to a professional level and give them the same level of privilege that we've had, so to speak, to build them into leaders, advocates, and more importantly, to build the field of after school so that we can pay it forward, so to speak.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that? I know that's the work you've been doing in Alaska.
That is a really, it's going to be a life-changing, life-altering communication for all involved in terms of, first of all, being able to recognize the privilege that we have been given. And I absolutely have been given much privilege. And I want to have that for all. Bottom line is, that's what I want. What does it take? It takes being able to really have difficult conversations around that. And to also work at strengthening our mentoring programs across. When I think of why I do what I do, or what I was given the opportunity to do, it every single time had something to do with an adult in my life that was caring, that saw something in me, that validated what that was, that encouraged me. And we have to do that tenfold with people of color. And we have to be allies in the process. We have to take the time to listen and truly understand. And I will tell you that I am still on that journey personally. I think we're all looking at the depth that we need to go right now, and how to do that and still be our authentic self, not being somebody different, but how do we share what we have and support that in others and continue that journey. This isn't a one-time, one deal thing. This is lifelong. And I don't know if that's too philosophical, but I'm willing to do the work. There are others that are willing to do the work, and that's where it starts.
Well, let me break down some of the things that you've said, just because you've said a couple of things over and over that I think I want to repeat for everybody on the audience. Plus, we're getting down to 6 minutes, so it's amazing how time flies, huh?
Yeah.
But you've said time and time again during this last 54 minutes that it's important to have adults who are caring, who encourage, provide opportunities, who celebrate, and also validate. And you've mentioned multiple times that it's a journey, and I love that. I always get worried when people are like, yep, I know everything, and my journey's done, and I'm an ally, and I'm here to help you. And I'm like, yeah, okay. That kind of worries me, but I love the caring, the encouragement, and everything that you've mentioned. I got about 2 more things that I want to pull out before we close. And one is, so one of the things that I know about you, Julie, is you have not only continued your journey, but you've stretched to also focus on policy. And so Alaska has Senator Murkowski, who is an after-school advocate and a Republican. And a lot of people right now are like, is that such a thing? And they're asking about it. But she's, really strong about after school. Can you tell us just briefly a little bit about that?
Yeah. Senator Murkowski, first of all, is a wonderful human being who loves children. And so I would say that this relationship started, boy, it's been a long time, 12, 13 years of being involved with After School Alliance, initially myself as an after school ambassador for a while. And so I was able to do visits on the Hill and learn about that process and talk about after school with Senator Murkowski, as well as Representative Young, Dan Sullivan. There's been several others, usually Republican. And so to be able to really break down what it is about after school, we were, again, fortunate to have 21st century grants that supported everything after school for us, pretty much. Now our school district also supports it with hard dollars.
Wow.
But one of the things that was required is evaluation, an external evaluation as part of the grant process, and being able to collect data that informed decision making was key. And I didn't realize at the time. Now pretty much everybody is doing that, but not all states had that. And so it was our job to really share the Alaska story, the Alaska results from after school, which for us were increasing attendance in school, better family engagement. We measured test scores improvement, grade improvement, attitudes towards school, all of those things. And sharing that with Senator Murkowski, as well as inviting her to our programs year after year for Lights On. And I remember there was one kind of defining moment where someone at After School Alliance, and I can't remember who it was, said, would you feel comfortable asking Senator Murkowski to co-sponsor the 21st century bill and reauthorization? And I said, sure, not really thinking anything more about it because she had been so involved and supportive along the way. And it was a little bit more than an ask, but Senator Murkowski also has an incredible staff member in Karen McCarthy. And so we need to recognize the work that all our senators and representatives staff do. And so she worked with me to talk about that and draft it. And then also allowed us in Alaska to work on the language for the reauthorization, because of course it has to have things that definitely meet what's needed in Alaska for Senator Murkowski to support. So that's how all of that started. And with the after school network then being established, and Thomas Azzarella, our great director of our network, that work continues. And it took us, I want to say it took us 10 or 11 years with Representative Don Young to finally make, while he supported after schools, he didn't quite get on supporting the language in the House side of things. And Thomas and volunteers around the state kept on that for a long time. And so now we have his support as well.
Well, that is amazing. We are at time. I could probably talk for another hour because there's so much that we have discussed, you and I, that we didn't pull out. Things like what exactly is generational resilience? You know, the fact that these individuals have or various families have dealt with this over the years and are so strong because they're, you know, because they're coming ahead out of it.
Right. And
Mhm.
I will just say that that is what we really need to focus on right now, is the fact that, yes, we have families in trauma. It is important to understand trauma and the best practices around that, but it is also very important for us to understand resiliency and how we can talk with our students, our children, and our families about their resiliency and what they have brought through their stories, through their life to be at this point, and that we will get through this together. And to focus back on the strengths of that family and also the strengths of our students, to highlight and celebrate those, to really continue to do that, especially now.
Well, let me just wrap us up by saying, first of all, I always say in these shows that I get to interview warriors of light. It's just my own little way of categorizing what people do. But Julie, thank you so much. Your story is amazing. The work you're doing is amazing. We didn't even talk about how you've grown family engagement from just a few families into 200 families. So we have so much more to unpack in the live show. But thank you. And if I took anything away from our discussion, there is hope because of the work that we're doing and that people like you are doing with not only political figures such as Senator Murkowski, but hands-on with the leaders of your local community and with these folks on the line right now. So thank you for all that you're doing. You're amazing. And after that, I'll turn the time back over to Elizabeth.
And I just want to thank everybody who is online, because again, the people who are choosing to be here are doing this work. And this work is so important right now. So thank you for being here. You can always email me. I tend to answer emails in the evenings. And so if there are any other questions, I'm more than happy to do that.
Thank you, Julie. Back to you,
Thank
Elizabeth.
you both so much. Shawn and Julie, this was another amazing conversation. I really appreciate you both taking the time out of your busy schedules and doing the good work to have this conversation. I think it's important that we continue to talk as educators. And if you out there are hoping to hear more from Julie, please join us in February for the Beyond School Hours Conference, where Perspectives will be live. Julie will be a panelist. We have some other amazing panelists who are going to continue this conversation. It's going to be amazing, and we hope that you will all join us. Again, I want to say thank you to the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. Without their support, this webinar is not possible. So we really appreciate all your time. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again for the next episode of Perspectives from the Field. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.